everyone, and welcome back to Brought to the Table. This is gonna be an interesting episode today. As you could probably tell by the title of this video, we're gonna be talking about probably my most anticipated game of 2020 in terms of the tabletop spectrum. And I want to go into it. Some of the folks from the community might have seen my thoughts on this game in very much detail, but I think it's time that I kind of publicly kind of talk about this more, especially since now that we've had some months to kind of like let the dust settle, kind of really just absorb. Other things have happened, stuff like that. And the game that we're going to be talking about today is Marvel Villainous from Ravensburger. Now, I don't want this to be a completely bashing video. You know, most times when you see folks do any type of review, especially if it's a critical, more negative review, it's, you know, the whole kind of gimmick with it is, let's just hark on this. Let's just chop this thing to bits. But in reality, though, if we're being honest, Marvel Villainous is still a good game. It's just the thing is, if you compare it to its essentially, its predecessor, Disney Villainous, it takes a lot of steps back and steps forward, and it's a lot of weird mixture of things. And on top of that, too, as folks know, Marvel is my favorite IP of all time. I adore superheroes. I adore a lot of the Marvel superheroes and villains. I think they have very captivating stories to tell. And I was really stoked because, you know, obviously it's Marvel. And if you can take the same engine for Villainous and put it into Marvel, you know, it's Marvel, baby. Folks heard me say that plenty of times at this point during the Marvel coverage. And I just want to get my honest thoughts. So let's just kind of start. Let's go ahead and start from the top. Marvel Villainous. Obviously, just to kind of clarify for those of you who don't know what the hell this game is, Marvel Villainous, Infinite Power, aka the tagline, is a 2 to 4 player game in which you essentially play as a Marvel supervillain, basically in their own domain, trying to accomplish their own goal. It's a very asymmetric style of game. You have your own board, you have your own cards, and there's own unique little what's called fate cards that end up getting added into this global of fate deck that you're using to basically stop your opponents from completing their objectives. That type of ordeal. Now, I bring the box up mainly because for this first reason alone. With Disney Villainous, you know, we talk about this a lot in the community where when you go look at the giant... Oh, as the box falls. If you look at the entire spectrum of Disney games, you know, from even video games to tabletop games, there really isn't anything that stands out as amazing. You know, when someone actually made this great quote that when you talk about a Marvel tabletop game, when you want to play something Marvel, guess what? We got Marvel Versus. We got Marvel Champions. We have Marvel United. We also have, as I open my, not even the whole collection for the sake of this video, this is just where I keep all of my Marvel Legendary rule booklets. All of these. All of these are in here. And there's 2 whole other bags filled with cards. I could keep going. There are tons of Marvel tabletop games out there. When it comes to Disney, guess what? The only good tabletop Disney game that really exists that is meant for basically any audience, big or small, super into strategy or super into just trying to get into the tabletop community, it's Disney Villainous. Nothing else like it exists out there. And with Marvel Villainous, you know, it makes, what for me was, what made it exciting was the fact that my favorite basically style of engine of tabletop game was going to be put in with my favorite IP. And I knew there was going to be some changes because obviously part of Villainous's whole aesthetic is the fact that theme is a very, very strong portion of the design of the game. But the thing is that especially as someone who has jumped into Marvel Champions, someone who really likes Marvel United, which I honestly think is probably the best Marvel game out there right now, and I can't wait to get the rest of the Kickstarter stuff. And even with me playing Marvel Legendary for all of these years and have all this content, Marvel Villainous just doesn't stand out. There are tons of other Marvel games if I want to go get my fix in a quicker, more simplistic way that still gives me theme, allows me to play with even the villains. Heck, if you want to even jump into the video game sphere, there are tons of video games of Marvel out there, from Marvel Ultimate Alliance to Marvel vs. Capcom to even in the olden days of some of the old video games from like the Super Nintendo to the PlayStation 2, that era of stuff. You can go play as your Marvel supervillains or however you want to. Marvel Villainous is no longer unique, which is kind of one of the flaws. You know, and like I said, it doesn't make the game bad. It's just, at the end of the day, after playing this, even as much as I love Disney Villainous, it's still my favorite game of all time, Disney Villainous is, from Tabletop. There are other Marvel games I rather play over Marvel Villainous, and that's not necessarily a good thing. Now, this is everyone's all cup of tea. If you really like the Villainous engine and stuff like that, and you don't normally play other Marvel games, this game's going to fit right into your collection, no problem. For me, I play this every once in a while, but honestly, in physical games that I still do, we mainly play Disney. You know, we did play Marvel really hardcore during August and a little bit early September, but after that, we just haven't really touched it. And it just sits there right now. So this is actually the first time for this video I've actually booted up the box in months. So that's kind of the first big thing here. Now, like I said, this also kind of goes in the way of, hey, if you really like the Villainous engine, buy this game. This game is still fantastic. It does a lot of really good things, which we're going to get into. But then there's some things where I'm just like, let's get to the table. Alright, so welcome to basically a sort of like, you know, bottom of the barrel like layout of Marvel Villainous right here. I've actually taken all the tokens that you would normally use and put them in the bag for Marvel Villainous right here. So rather than actually use what's the game gives you, which is this little power vault, which I'll show off right here. Here's the power vault, see-through plastic, and all that stuff. But here you go. Here's Marvel Villainous right here. Let's kind of dive into it. So similar to what I just talked about before we jump to the table right here. Very similar to Disney Villainous. Each villain's got their own board. It's got their own unique objective. You know, you kind of only interact directly into your own particular domain is what they're called in this game compared to realms. And there's a fate deck of stuff that you're going to be using to block your opponents and stuff like that. Now, what makes Marvel unique over Disney Villainous, I won't go into how everything works, because honestly, a lot of the stuff works the exact same from Disney, so it's going to be very straightforward. But I'm going to be talking about the new things and how that stuff kind of plays into a little bit of my thoughts, my concerns, and all that stuff like so. So, the biggest new thing that's probably the most unique to this compared to Disney is that in Disney, each particular villain had their own unique fate deck that's attached to them. Only cards within their, deck as well as their fate deck can only interact with their own individual board. In Marvel Villainous, because the characters are from, they interact with all these different villains in all shapes and forms, the fate deck is now unified. So it is one unified fate deck of different heroes and effects that can stop the villains. Now, on top of that, too, villains still have their own unique cards. So if I actually go pull this up right here, Taskmaster right here, who is on the lower half of the screen, has his own unique fate cards that you bring into the game when Taskmaster is being played. But then, with Thanos, you also bring in the Thanos cards that, help, go against Thanos a little bit more. But then there's also a common fate deck, which is kind of filled with more of your general Marvel heroes that you all know and love. So stuff like Captain America, Iron Man, all that fun stuff. And as always, the artwork on all these cards is brand new just for this game. It's absolutely fantastic. They've actually gotten some of the villainous artists from the Disney Villainous line to actually come in and do some of the art for these characters. Specifically, Taskmaster was actually done by the same artist who did Jafar. So, things like that. The artwork is still as stunning as ever. But, not only is this Fate deck unique, there are also now cards within these particular decks that allow you to actually move allies from your domain to another player's domain and vice versa, stuff like that. So, for example, just to, show this off here, let me find the card. Where is it? There you go. So this Shadow Initiative card that exists within Taskmaster's deck allows him to take an ally and move them to another domain's location and then add a +1 marker on them. So that's one thing that you can do that's unique. And the thing is, allies are then essentially treated as heroes in the other player's domains. So just like, before in, Disney, if you got, let's just pretend for purposes, you got allies with strength that are equal to this particular unit that you want to defeat, you just take the vanquish action and they are defeated and they go back to whatever discard pile they're supposed to go to. So this Taskmaster ally would technically go back to the Taskmaster discard. If it was a Fate hero, let's say if it was Thor would go back to the Fate discard pile, stuff like that. All that shenanigans. So that is essentially kind of like some of the major gimmicks right there. The other major gimmick, as you just saw, is the fact that now there's ways to basically alter strength through tokens. So there's -1 and there's +1. There's different cards in all the different decks that allow you to basically strengthen or weaken particular cards, stuff like that. Another unique feature, as you can see on the boards, is that there is a specialty slot. So when you first look at the boards, when you get them, unlike Disney, normally this part right here is actually slotted out and this part is smaller, so it's only just the portrait here and not on the back. On here, you now get this specialty slot. And what this does right here is that there's going to be specific cards that each character has that are essentially act as like permanent upgrades that you can use. So for example, Lesson Plan is a specialty that if Taskmaster plays it, it goes into the specialty slot right here. There is no limit to the amount of specialties you can have. This is essentially now a passive effect that the Taskmaster player has at all times. So this one is, you take an activate action, you pay 1 power, and you can go grab an item or effect from your discard pile. That is essentially a permanent specialty right there. You cannot remove that. It is a really cool gimmick because originally there was a lot of passive effects that took place on stuff like allies or items and things like that. But now, these can actually be removed in various different ways, whether it's a fate card, whether maybe it's attached to a particular ally, stuff like that. Now, that stuff can't be removed by specialties. Now, there are fate cards that can alter how specialties can work and stuff like that, but these are always permanent. They will not go away. There's no way to get rid of the specialties per se, which I think is actually a really cool mechanic. Now, fading is a little different. I won't shuffle this deck, so for the sake of me putting this away, much easier. But essentially what happens is when you take a fate action, you only draw the top card of the fate deck, and you play it onto basically your one of your opponents. So in this case, we're doing a 2-player game, so I can only target Thanos if I'm the Taskmaster player. But if, I could choose another player if I so choose to. So unlike before, you only get to take 1 card and then play it. You don't get the option of 2 and then choosing one of them and discarding the other. Now within this Fate deck, there are these things called events. When you play an event, once it's revealed, it immediately gets played out. And then this event is now actually, a global thing that affects all the players. So this Helicarrier alert makes it so players now only can draw up to 3 cards at the end of their turn from 4. Now what you can do in order to get rid of that event is that you can actually play allies or move allies from your domain to that event, or like I said, play them directly. So I can play allies there, and then once the allies' total strength from both or all the players is equal to or greater than the strength of the event is discarded. Anyone who contributed an ally to that particular event will gain the reward. So this reward would says draw 3 cards. That would happen at any point. And then there you go. That's how events work. So that's the kind of the general gist of some of the stuff. The only kind of major rule change that was changed from Disney to Marvel is that you'll notice that there's this move action right here. I'll actually bring up Thanos' board to show it off a little closer. So you'll notice that this has actually changed a little bit in terms of its iconography. It's still technically considered a move action. It's renamed to relocate. And the reason for that is that originally in Disney, the way that it worked is that when you were to take an ally or item and want to move it, you would only be able to move it to an adjacent location unless otherwise stated. Stuff like the Roadster from Cruella's deck is an example of this. Here in Marvel, relocate means that you can actually take this particular ally or item and move it to any location within your domain. This also makes it so, especially for something like Taskmaster, if you had an ally at a location in another domain, you can use that relocate to move it back to any location in your domain. It's important to note, though, that you cannot directly use the relocate action to move one of your allies to another player's domain, only unless told otherwise or through special card effects and text and all that stuff. So, also with that, you can also relocate it to a particular event. So if you want to get rid of it and you already had an ally out and don't want to spend money, that type of thing, that's also something you can do. So that's kind of the general gist. There isn't any new direct actions on any of the boards per se, but that's kind of the general gist of all the new stuff that's in Marvel Villainous if you haven't kind of dove into it at all or just heard about it. Alright, so I actually want to start this off by talking about a lot of the positives because, there are, I am going to be very critical of this game, but there are lots of positives that I do want to go over because this game does a lot of things I think very well. First things first, one thing I didn't talk about with the setup is that players now actually start their mover on their portrait of their villain. So unlike before in Disney, players had to start at the leftmost space. And then this would make it so those villains were essentially limited to certain, locations at the start. So you would only have 3 locations to go to, 2 if you were in, a locked villain location board, stuff like that. Now with Marvel, you have access to all 4 locations from the get-go. This makes a lot of things that have become very clear in Disney to be powerful, like turn 1 fading, things like that, to kind of go out the window, which I really much enjoy, and it actually gives you options to maybe go to different places you normally wouldn't want to go to. I know specifically for Taskmaster, he has a lot of allies that actually are really good with moving and stuff like that. So if you start off with one of those characters that you would like to play, you can go here, gain power, maybe activate something, move stuff around if you want to. Same thing with Thanos a little bit. Now this isn't always going to be the case, but it does give you basically kind of an extra, option. And if you folks have heard the puns of all the Disney Villainous videos I do, options are always great. One thing Marvel is really good at is giving the players lots of options to do lots of different things. Another thing that I really enjoy is the specialty cards. Each villain has specialty cards. Now, they are done in different ways. Taskmaster has cards that he plays directly out. Thanos can only get specialties through the power of the Infinity Stones. Killmonger has cards that he can play, as well as a specialty that actually directly goes with his goal, that he has to defeat basically a rival. Then there's the specialty that gets revealed with that, stuff like that. Ultron has these unique upgrades that he essentially needs to do to actually win and complete his objective of Age of Ultron, which I think is super cool. And then Hela also has very similar kind of setup to Taskmaster, where it's essentially all in the deck. You need to play those particular things. The reason why I like these specialties is that they're essentially permanent upgrades that you basically give to your character that really kind of help out their game plan. There were definitely some villains in the original core set of Disney that could have probably been benefited in their game plan, or just how to make them a little bit more accessible by doing stuff like specialties. And Marvel definitely excels at that. Now, not all the specialties are super great. Taskmaster is actually a perfect example of this, because one of his specialties revolves around basically his whole gimmick, if you've never read the comics, where he essentially has photographic reflexes. If he sees something that he can do that's a physical, technique, he can do it. And they were definitely able to do it with this card, but I'm not going to read it. But as you can see, this is the most text that we've ever seen in Villainous. It is a lot to kind of digest, and especially for a game that's supposed to be, introduction to folks' first time into tabletop gaming, it's a lot to read. And honestly, this particular specialty right here, you're never going to use it. You may use it depending on certain situations, but for the fact it costs 2 and what you need to do with it, which essentially, opponent plays an effect card, you spend money to put it into underneath here, and then you can play it. It's not super. So I kind of ignore that one and just chuck it when I get it. So yeah, but that's really the only prime example of that. All the other specialties that you'll get with all the characters, from the stuff that Killmonger can do, the stuff that Hela can do, even Thanos with his Infinity Stones, you're going to use those specialties. So that's really kind of the only example of a bad one per se. On top of that too, because that there all these characters, have to be played with Thanos, and Thanos specifically has Infinity Stones, which essentially all have the activate icon. And what happens with Thanos is that when he would be able to reveal a stone using one of his cards, they basically get placed to another player's domain, and they get attached to an ally in that player's domain. And if they don't get to, there's a whole set of rules and stuff like that to help with that. And what happens is that this player now has control of this particular stone. What this means is that all the players need to have some types of cards that allow them to activate. And I really enjoy this. One of my favorite things I've discovered within Villainous is that the activate action is a really cool concept. Especially playing a lot of Corella, I really dig the activate action. And the fact that, all the different characters now have activate actions is pretty cool. And all the activate actions actually are useful, whether it's related to a specialty or if it's something on an item within the domain itself. I really dig. Taskmaster's a great example of this because he has a card called Training Dummy, if I can find it, where essentially you activate it and it's going to give a +1 strength token to an ally that you control at this location, which is pretty swell. So I really dig that concept as well. On top of this too, I think the Common Fate deck is a really good idea. I actually really like the idea with only drawing one card and then essentially playing it. Oh, those are all the Thanos ones. Let's do the Thor one. You just reveal this one, play it, all that stuff, and the fact that a lot of the heroes specifically, even though there are some that are specific to particular characters, they all still work against all the different villains. So even though Scott Lang is only going to appear when Taskmaster's out, his ability where it says all allies at Scott Lang's location lose 1 strength, that's still really good. That can go good against any of the different villains. That can counter all sorts of different stuff that you can possibly use. So it all works out, and I really do dig that. We'll get back to this, though, because there's some things I do have to say with the Fate deck. Oh, as I break this. I think... Other than that, stuff like the relocate, I think is a really good concept. Essentially, rather than doing the adjacent movement, you can move stuff around. I really like that concept. I also really do dig the ability to actually, move allies with specific card effects to different locations, and then they end up acting as heroes. And especially the way that it works with the characters that can do that effectively. In Taskmaster specifically, they're going to gain these +1 tokens like so. And then on top of that, the opponent's going to have to decide whether they want to take that out or possibly take out another powerful hero that's blocking actions that is going towards their goal. On top of that, there's some cool things that specifically in Hela's domain that she can do. I won't bring out the cards, but her whole gimmick is that she places soul marks onto heroes or allies that are opposing, and she can basically use defeat those characters and gain that soul mark and add it to her little collection. And then if she's got 8 combination of soul marks / allies at Odin's Vault, she wins the game, and all that stuff. And what that does is that when you can put them on opponents' heroes that are placed out, and you can actually force them to decide whether they want to defeat that hero and give you the soul mark, or keep it out and work around that. Although Hela's got ways to grab that hero, bring it into her domain, and then defeat it on her own terms. Stuff like that, which I think is very, very clever. I also really like the new +1, -1 tokens. I think that helps a lot of the weird circumstances where characters will get buff or decrease their strength, stuff like that. It does specify, too, when it is a token. So that example of Scott Lang right there, that one doesn't specify you need to do the tokens, but stuff that would actually permanently buff those characters I think is actually a really good call to help kind of decrease the amount of card attachments that you're going to have to particular characters. Although that stuff still exists in this game, don't get me wrong, where you're attaching items to particular characters. But there's a lot less of that in this game, which I really enjoy. It helps kind of keep the card space, to really just stacking the heroes or the allies and items together. And when you move stuff around, you don't have to worry about that. I really do dig that a lot. So there you go. That is, actually, one more thing. This is the biggest thing of all things with this game. Disney Villainous had a lot of, essentially, wait a turn, then you win the game. You meet your objective on your turn, the opponents have to go around, and if they can stop you, then the game's over. Especially in multiplayer games, that can be super frustrating. I know as a Scar player, you get to 17 succession, you get Hakuna Matata, and then you get Hakuna Matata again, and then you were at 17, and now you're back at some dumb low number that you don't like. In Marvel Villainous, each one of these goals, regardless of what the goal is not a start return. Essentially, as soon as that goal is accomplished by that particular villain, they win. So that's super great. That applies for all these different characters in here. Once that particular objective is completed, you're done. You don't have to worry about it. It's super great. I really enjoy that concept. It makes the games essentially, everyone is a win on your turn villain, which, in Disney, those characters do exist. But now the fact that these goals that normally you would look at Disney and these would be like a collectathon goal, have all these at the start of your turn, that's gone. And the nice thing too is that there's very little cards in the Fate deck that actually remove progress, which I think is super important. The only major one is for Taskmaster. There's a card that allows the opponent to remove allies because Taskmaster needs 4 allies of a strength of 5 or more at 4 different locations. It could be even in an opponent's domain. And what's nice about this is that even though you can get rid of those allies, Taskmaster's deck was designed in mind the fact that you can do lots of stuff to either get allies back or has lots of allies and crazy ways to buff those characters very quickly. So you don't have to worry about if one of those gets put away, you got lots of stuff back. And on top of that too, you can use that card against your opponent as well. So it's not like, it's only going to target Taskmaster, although it's going to do the best against Taskmaster. So there's a lot of my positives right there. There is a lot of positive stuff to say about this game. The artwork's great. I really like the pieces. The board art's great. A lot of the things that they decided to clean up from Disney, I think they did a really good job. All sorts of stuff. So there you go. That's the general positives that I really like about Marvel Villainous. Now, all good things have to come to an end. This is when I have to start, being a little sad when talking about this game, because I love Marvel and I don't like crapping on stuff. But I don't want to call this crapping on. I really kind of want to say this as a, for those of you who don't want to completely understand, this game was not designed by the original designers of Disney Villainous. Disney Villainous was designed by Prospero Hall. This particular game is actually designed directly through in-house designers at Ravensburger. This is what this game was. Now, it's using a lot of the same engine ideas and concepts from Disney brought over, so it's not like a lot of those have completely changed, but this is not designed by the same team. And sometimes when you transition, as if any of you, those of you who have followed game development from video games, tabletop games, what have you, from designer to different designer, whatever have you, sometimes things get lost in the shuffle, and I'm pretty sure that's probably what happened. There's probably some things that did not carry over and, some little weird intricacies. So let's kind of jump into that. First thing I want to talk about is the events. These suck. I hate these. These are dumb. Straight up being 100% honest here. Now I'm bringing out Avengers Assemble because this is the worst one of all of them, and I think it's the dumbest one of them all. But the event concept is cool. The reason why it's cool is that if you were to ever basically design some type of like campaign cooperative style thing where the villain boards and stuff, you were all working together towards a common goal, these make a lot of sense. The problem though is that because the game mechanics now revolve around you draw one card to try to stop your opponent, these events don't stop your opponent. They basically create a hazard that gets in the opponent's way. So with Avengers Assemble, essentially what happens is that every time that you start your turn, you basically have to draw a fate card and play it on yourself. You can't play it towards an opponent. Stuff like that. So that's cool. But look at this. This is 10 strength. That is a lot of strength that you got to deal with. And all the players have to contribute to that. I won't go into the balancing, but there's some weird balancing stuff that this card can get into with some of the villains too. I don't really like this. Now what's cool is that, guess what? They did recognize that, hey, not everyone's going to like these events. They actually have 3 different difficulties where it's like No events, one event at a time, or every single event that gets shown, you play it. Which, cool that they at least mentioned that in the rule book. The problem, though, is that some of these fate cards in here, as well as stuff in the villain decks, revolve around events in order for them to kind of work. So, for example, Hawkeye says, when Hawkeye is played, you may defeat one of the targeted player's allies at an event. So, essentially, Hawkeye, if you don't include events, becomes a 2-strength hero that does nothing. There are other cards, specifically in Ultron's deck, where he has an ally that allows you to relocate allies that after, essentially, you defeat an event, you can move those allies back into your domain. Those essentially become worthless allies. So there's allies, there's different cards that are actually built around the event system, but since the event system isn't fun, if you want to disinclude it, it actually turns off a lot of the different effects and abilities on some of the cards in the game. So these events just aren't very good because of the fact that, one, you only draw one card, and if it's an event, you have to play it. It's very detrimental. On top of that, too, each particular villain has their own specific event. Taskmaster has one right here that says that you cannot move allies or items except to this particular event if you want to. And these suck because the thing is, these stack on top of the normal events that you would get that are the global ones. So this one in particular, you can only play this to Taskmaster, and there's ones for each one of the villains. And those just aren't fun to deal with. Like I said, from a gameplay perspective, these are a great idea if you were going to do this for like a campaign-style cooperative game with the Villainous engine. But for a game where you're trying to work against each other, it just adds another hindrance in the way. And it's just, and especially when you're trying to actually use the fate cards to hinder and halt your opponent's progress. Because essentially, Villainous has always been a game of speed. How fast and efficient can you go against your opponent. With those events, it just makes that a lot more difficult to do. And we're being honest too. I know the Avengers Assemble is a cool name for an event, but this should just be an effect that plays a hero from your discard pile. I'd rather be playing heroes and stuff like that rather than playing events like this. Just being straight up. Even from a fun factor standpoint, it's just more fun to do that. So that's kind of my first major gripe with this game. The other major gripe is something I didn't expect to actually 100% think I would miss this, is this game should be compatible with Disney. And what I mean by that is you should be able to take these particular villains and be able to play them against the particular Disney villains. You can keep the specialties, you can keep all that stuff, but the problem is that the way that these decks are designed, they are meant to interact with the other players, which I totally 100% get. That if you want to build a different system to go against a different character, that's cool. The problem is that Disney already has 15 villains that exist that you can go purchase right now. And Marvel right now is its own individual box with no expansions. That might sound a little selfish on my part because we already have so much Disney. But the thing is that, what I would think would be great is if you can take normally Disney fans and then bring a Marvel villain in there that can be fun and then have that be able to interact with the other characters. That'd be super cool. Now, I know there's tons of people that have been trying to homebrew stuff, but I'm just being honest with all of you, that's going to be incredibly hard to do even if you have a system in place, just because all these cards really directly work around relocating stuff, to other domains, the way that the Fate cards work. It just, the Fate deck specifically isn't really built to work that way, because the common Fate deck is 15 cards, I believe, and then there's like 7 events in there. I forget the number at the top of my head. I used to know. And then, even with all the unique stuff, it just doesn't work. I wish it was compatible. It would just be a lot easier of a way to introduce the Marvel franchise to mainly Disney fans. Because one thing I've learned through being part of the Disney community for Disney Villainous is that, I do enjoy Disney, but Marvel is my IP. That's the stuff I love. And not as many Disney folks enjoy that IP as much as I do. So it'd be a cool way to basically be able to introduce these characters to those players if I was able to do that, but sadly I can't. I can only do Marvel with Marvel characters. And, I assume we're going to get expansions. Loki's on the back of the freaking instruction manual, so expect that. But, I want to be able to mix and match this with the Disney characters and be able to have that work. I kept saying Marvel baby when we first got this, hoping that would have been a lot easier, but sadly it just isn't. So That's what's another kind of major gripe. Um, Another thing too, to be very frank, I'm talking about Taskmaster a lot because Taskmaster, of all the villains in the box from the comics, is my favorite. I love Taskmaster. He's a really cool villain. He's got a cool outfit. He's got cool different interactions with different heroes. He interacts with the Avengers, Spider-Man, Deadpool, sometimes the X-Men. He's a really cool character. The thing is that a lot of these particular goals right here, they're kind of stolen from some of the original Disney cast in terms of how they kind of got interwoven with everything. And the only unique villain in the entire box, honestly, at the end of the day, is Thanos. Thanos is the most interesting because he directly is kind of what I feel like the game was built around. Is causing conflict between the players. Because his whole gimmick is he summons the Infinity Stones and places them in another player's domain. He then has to go basically take one of his allies, and he's the only character that can do this, in which he can take an ally from his domain. Once an Infinity Stone is out, he can relocate that ally to that particular location, grab the stone. Then he has to relocate that ally back to his domain, and then he snags the stone permanently that puts it into his gauntlet, like so. Out of all the villains in this game for Marvel, Thanos is the most interesting. He is the most fun to play, and when he's in the game feels complete. The problem is that if you remove Thanos from the picture, the game feels a lot less of what it was designed to be. Taskmaster and Hela probably have the most overall interaction with the other players, but that's still very mediocre compared to Thanos. And then Ultron doesn't really have any direct interaction, minus like one singular card, and Killmonger can only interact in one way with a crappy ally where he can actually directly play it onto other players' boards, but it kind of really goes against his whole goal and gimmick, stuff like that. This game feels like it was built around this whole concept of being able to play allies to other locations and actually be to directly interact with other players' boards without having to fake. I'm pretty sure that was the whole concept behind only drawing one fake card, is because they're, because, you're going to be able to do that. But then fading becomes a little less powerful, because when Thanos is the only one that can directly do that the most, and everyone else either does it mediocre to meh, you kind of lose that appeal of that whole system, which I think is very sad. Because, being very straight up, I'm not a huge fan of Thanos as a villain. I know he's big in the MCU. He's always been the giant purple, thumb man, goofball. I remember classic Thanos design where he just looks goofy. Granted, he looks a lot better now thanks to modernization and stuff like that. But he's the most fun character to play in this game, or play against, or just at least have in the game in general. And you don't want to have to play as Thanos every time. And when Thanos isn't in the game, it just doesn't feel complete, which sucks. I really wish it wasn't like that. Because honestly, his whole gimmick of going to find the stones and everything really is fun to do, and it's a very fun, complex puzzle to complete. And I just feel like without him, the game just doesn't feel right. On top of that, too, there is definitely some weird freaking balancing in this game. We're going to get into the nerdy stuff now, everybody. So, for example, one of the big core concepts that you'll see with any villainous character is that their 3 gain spot right here is always paired with 2 card plays and either an activate, a move, a discard, stuff like that. That's core at all villainous. It's always been. Gain 3, activate, play a card, Fate. Now, Fate's at the top of this location, so you can sit there and complain whatever you want to do. But Ultron right here is dumb busted. He's really strong, and it just seems like the balancing of some of the stuff in the game isn't on par with how some of the stuff should work. Thanos, by design, is a very much slower character, and especially assuming that's how he was kind of built around, that was the character the pillar that they were designing towards. Some of these characters can play a lot faster, and there's just some weird balancing stuff that goes into it, especially as we've been doing a lot of competitive Disney Villainous. It's almost weird why, turn 1 you wouldn't go gain 3, Fate, play something valuable and activate it, It just seems really odd to me that a lot of the design in this game kind of just got thrown out the window, and this is what I was talking about, things got lost in the shuffle, where there's just certain things that just don't make sense with how boards are set up, some of the balancing of some of the cards. Speaking of the cards, There's definitely some cards in here that are not worded very well, that are very hard to make out. And kind of one of the big things that we've had discussions on is that it's really hard to play the game when you don't even know how to play the game. Um, Stuff like Training Academy is super confusing with how some of the stuff has worked. We've had consistent, inconsistencies about Anaconda and how she's worded. And the reason why this stuff is always up to debate, and this is with all sorts of different characters. I won't go into everything, but it's because the villain guides that come with the game, that are in the bag and all that stuff. I have my card sleeves in here. The stuff that's in those contradict what's on the cards, and some of the stuff that's on the cards counteracts some of the stuff that's in the rules. And you're like, well, the cards always trump the rules, right? Well, the way it just there's a lot of these cards are worded poorly, and some of the effect. All this it doesn't seem like they were all designing under the same roof. And then there's cards that have some different, you've probably heard about this. There are some things that actually had some misprints on them. Specifically, Taste of Cosmic Power had an issue where it's supposed to be an effect, but there was 2 copies of it being an item. Luckily, they did send out copies of that, which was nice. Stuff like Death's Favor, it was also super weird, where it says the way that it's worded, it's when you move to the location, but it was corrected where it's supposed to essentially be at any time during the turn. Stuff like the Legions of Thanos, no additional ability, is actually worded wrong. I believe so. Is it that one? I think so. There's one of these that's worded wrong. No additional ability has forgot the eye. There's lots of weird misprints. If you looked at the rule book too, there's just lots of weird stuff. The game overall, the production on that side of it, just the game's design, the balance, and everything just doesn't feel right. Like I said, one of the reasons why I actually stopped playing the game was when we were having too many disagreements and issues with how the game was supposed to be played. I just didn't want to play it anymore. When you don't know how to play the game, because part of what makes Villainous fun is learning how to be more efficient at learning your character to win and do all the cool, crazy stuff with them and discovering that stuff. When I discover something that's not supposed to work or isn't correct, or we're all trying to figure out how the heck a card's supposed to work, it's not fun. And that's what's really going to kill this game for a lot of people. It doesn't help the fact that there's a lot of inconsistencies with the rules. There's spelling mistakes. A general consumer is not going to understand that they can go contact Ravensburger to go get new copies of Taste of Cosmic Power, because right now there's not currently a reprint out there at your local stores. So, there's just lots of weird stuff with this game that overall it just doesn't hit the spot. And the worst thing too is that I really want to like this game, but when I got games and Marvel United and Champions and all that stuff that I can go play instead of this, I'm going to play those instead of this. And I don't like that, because I love Villainous. Villainous is one of my favorite games. And it sucks to say that. I hope they improve this. Supposedly they're trying to fix a few things with balancing and stuff for a reprint of the first game. Let's hope. I just really hope that they fix this stuff, because I really want to like this game. I love Marvel. I just want to like it. All right, so I've done enough. I don't think it was too critical. I don't know. Folks can wreck me in the comments below. But it sucks because I really want to like this game. This game does a lot of things, and, the concepts and some of the stuff that they do in the game, I didn't even talk about some of the new terminology that they use to help kind of talk about certain states and things to help, order of operation stuff. But then it gets destroyed by rules inconsistencies and things like that, and it's just not fun. And I want to learn this game to get better at it, to become more efficient at it. And it just doesn't seem like the designers really kind of knew what the core of what made Disney great, which sucks. I really do like the new player interaction stuff in this game. It's just not completely done well or at all, honestly, for the most part, because Thanos is really the only character that really wants you to do that. And I just want more of that too. If we get more characters like Thanos in this game, heck yeah, I want to play more of this game. It sucks. But the thing is that obviously with all this stuff, from a general audience perspective, casual Marvel fans that aren't normally into tabletop games are going to enjoy this game. It is essentially still Villainous. It's a different take on that, way of gameplay. And I do think they will still get a kick out of this. But from a hardcore gamer standpoint, you know, Disney Villainous specifically, you know, obviously if you folks have been watching the channel, been following me on my different stuff, we have a league for Disney Villainous. That's how good that game is. You can introduce that game to somebody just to get them in tabletop gaming, and you get them to the point where they want to go compete. That's how good that game is. Marvel, even if you want to remove the whole like common fate deck concept of it, because I know people have argued that that's like, oh, that removes a lot of the strategy. I could even get to the point where I wanted to break out of the intro section of that game. And that's what I hope they fix. I know Ravensburger knows that we have these issues. I'm just hoping they're willing to fix them. And if anyone from Ravensburger is watching this, just know that I want to like this game more than Disney. I'm going to make that very clear. I want to like this more than Disney. I love Marvel more than Disney. As an IP, the Villainous engine is one of the best engines in tabletop gaming, hands down. But there's lots of things that got to get cleaned up here. And if you folks can fix that, I will sit here and promote this game. I will play this game more on my channel. I want, and all that stuff. I'm and hope to God we get Venom. You folks give me Venom, I'll remove this video and then I'll talk praises on this game. But I want to love this game, and I'm hoping that stuff gets fixed because, you know, I love this franchise. I think it's a really good franchise. It's definitely changed my life. It's changed, you know, the way, you know, it's basically the whole reason why I started creating content in the first place is Villainous. And especially with it being Marvel, I just want to like that more. So, but it's still a good game. Is it as good as Disney? Not by a long shot, but still a good game. So if you do want to pick it up and you're a Villainous fan, I can't say that you shouldn't. If you are a hardcore Disney Villainous fan, or you're a hardcore tabletop gaming fan with Marvel games, might not be for you. It's definitely worth a shot if you want to get it to your table. If you weren't a fan of the Disney IPs to begin with and want to try it with Marvel, it might be a better way to get into it. But I digress. It's up to you how you want to make that decision. So, Marvel Villainous. There you go. It's my 2 cents. Very weird episode I brought to the table. Normally, I don't like being critical on the show, but this has been something on my chest for a long time. And I do want to say, this game does lots of good things. It could just be even better. And I know it could. So until then, I'll see you folks on the next time when we do a lot more uplifting of a show, where we're going to actually go back to one of my absolute favorite games when I was a kid. Star Wars Epic Duels. I'll see you folks on that episode. Take care, everybody.